The investigation into that deadly plane crash in the French Alps is focusing on one man, the pilot who allegedly brought the jet down deliberately with 149 other people on board. All the while, the captain locked out, pounding desperately on the door. So what could have motivated this apparent mass murder? And what kind of protection do flights here in America have against a killer in the cockpit? Here's ABC's David Curley.
These haunting images are the first we've seen up close of the twisted metal and shattered debris, all that is left of Germanwings Flight 9525. Tattered clothing, a circuit board, severed chunks of a broken machine. The plane mysteriously crashed into the rugged French Alps on Tuesday, killing all 150 souls on board. But now a recording from that battered black box recovered from the wreckage may reveal the shocking, horrible truth. This tragedy was apparently no accident. In an emotional news conference, a French prosecutor said the flight's 27-year-old co-pilot, Andreas Lubitz, locked the captain out of the cockpit and then deliberately crashed the plane. In the final moments before impact, screaming passengers heard on the recording. A tragic end to a flight that began routinely. A 10 a.m. takeoff from Barcelona. Everything seems normal. The cockpit voice recorder showing a friendly conversation between the two pilots. But then the co-pilot, Lubitz, is less jovial. His answers short. 30 minutes into the flight, the jet hits cruising altitude, 38,000 feet. The captain asks Lubitz to take over, presumably to use the bathroom, and he leaves the cockpit, starting the 10 minutes of horror. Once alone with the door locked, flight tracking data shows the co-pilot changes the autopilot, sending the jetliner down toward the Alps. Outside the cockpit, the captain feels the plane descending. He knocks on the door, no answer. He starts banging, as if trying to break the door down. Silence from the co-pilot. But on the recording, Lubitz can be heard breathing normally. Seconds tick by, the jet dropping more than 3,000 feet a minute, closing in on the mountains in plain view of the passengers as they plummet to their deaths. ABC's Hamish McDonald was at the crash site as grieving families began to arrive.
This is the convoy of families coming to visit the site of the crash. There'll be a mountainside vigil here. This is about as close as these families will come to seeing the location that this plane went down.
Among the victims, 3 Americans, including Emily Selke, traveling with her mother Yvonne on the flight from Barcelona to Dusseldorf, and Robert Oliver, who had been living in Spain. A critical question for families: why couldn't the captain get back into the cockpit? Since the terrorist attacks of 9/11, commercial aircraft, including Germanwings Airbus A320, have a nearly impenetrable cockpit door.
After 9/11, what we were trying to do is make sure the bad guys couldn't get into the cockpit, so they reinforced the door to where you couldn't even blow it off the hinges.
There are also strict lockdown procedures in case of emergency.
The new reinforced Phase 2 cockpit door.
As this Airbus demonstration video explains, once the cockpit door is locked from the inside,
this code pad provides increased security levels.
A digital code is required to get back in.
The red LED is lit, confirming the door is locked.
But even then, the pilot inside the cockpit can block re-entry for 5 minutes.
But of course, along with that comes a problem. What happens if you need to get into the cockpit and nobody inside is able to let you in? Or even worse, a situation like we have here where somebody's denying access.
U.S. regulations require that 2 people always remain in the cockpit. If one pilot exits, a relief pilot or a flight attendant must take their place. This was not the policy of Germanwings.
Not all the international air carriers follow that no-lone zone rule. We may be fairly unique in the United States. I think that's going to change.
Tonight, some international carriers, including Air Canada and Norwegian Air, are changing their policy to match that of the U.S. There are big questions now about Lubitz's state of mind. The airline says he was 100% fit to fly, doing some of his training in the U.S.
Einwandfrei.
The CEO saying his performance was without criticism, nothing at all striking. The airline adds he underwent a rigorous psychological examination as part of his training, and there were no red flags, which has many now wondering about the quality of psychological screenings of pilots across all airlines. This is not the first time a pilot has killed himself and murdered those on board. It happened in an Egypt air crash and is one of the theories of what may have happened to Malaysia Flight 370, which still has not been found.
The psychological screening process for a flight deck crew member varies significantly from air carrier to air carrier.
Antonio Cortez is a former commercial pilot and trainer with 24 years of experience. He says there is a lack of consistency for psychological testing.
Sometimes it can be a rather cursory sort of assessment by maybe a psychologist assigned to the interview team. Other times it can be a rather robust set of questions to establish sort of the psychological makeup of the individual.
The association that represents most major U.S. airlines, including Delta, American, and United, said in a statement that their pilots undergo rigorous evaluations in the hiring process, and the FAA requires pilots to disclose all existing psychological conditions and medications. But the same is not always true for pilots on international carriers.
There is no standard within certain countries' industries, much less across the globe.
The major screening, psychological screening for airline pilots is only in the hiring phase. After that, there is no particular routine screening or rescreening of people. And one of the reasons is you're not really going to be able to find a way to do this effectively. It's much more effective to have everybody watching everybody else.
Lubitz's Facebook page, taken down earlier today, offered no signs of emotional distress or clues of the tragedy to come. Today, my colleague Terry Moran followed Lubitz's trail, driving through the German countryside from Dusseldorf, where he had an apartment, to his hometown of Montalbar, in the shadow of a castle.
This is the small airstrip where Andreas Lubitz learned how to fly. The flight club here in Montalbar remembers him here. They say it was his lifelong dream to become a pilot.
The chairman of his aviation club says he was a very calm, responsible man. In Montalbar, he lived most of the time with his parents on a quiet street in a development. Now the shutters closed, keeping prying eyes out as police carry out suitcases. The neighbors stunned. He's not the type of guy who would try to kill other people. Absolutely not, he says. Another neighbor says he simply can't believe it. He was a young and healthy man, or at least he appeared to be very healthy. Investigators are still searching for the flight data recorder in the wreckage. They hope it will help them piece together those final, terrifying moments and maybe answer the...
I'm just going to do a quick video because I got some notifications on Twitter about a plane crash similar to Flight 93, if I could show plane crash. And this is a short video addressing this whole idea now of plane crashes that are similar to Shanksville. Look, what happened on 9/11 is unprecedented. We saw multiple hijackings that have never occurred before, where you had the pilot directly crashing into a target. All right, so we never had multiple hijackings where the intended target was the ground or a building. Now, we've had hijackings before where they intentionally crashed a plane, like PSA 1771, and later Germanwings 9525, but it's very, very rare. And one thing they all have in common is that these plane crashes left little to no sizable plane debris, because you ain't going to find much of plane debris after the plane is crashing, holding 16 to 30,000 pounds of fuel going 300, 400 miles an hour. Just look what happens to a body when it's jumping off the World Trade Center. What do you think it's going to look like when it goes to fire and hitting an object at 500, 600 miles an hour? There's not going to be much left, if anything at all. So the meticulous, painstaking investigation into human remains at all three crash sites is really, almost an impossible task. With Flight 93, however, they've recovered all 38 of the passengers and crew that were involved. Now, with Germanwings, I like to use Germanwings 9525 because it's recent. And when the French Bureau of Inquiry and Analysis for Civil Aviation opened the investigation into the crash, they found that the cockpit voice recorder did survive, but it was but it was usable, and that they found no plane
debris bigger than the side of a car. And they did manage to find no whole bodies, but they did find DNA, 150 sets of DNA, which compared with the victim's family's DNA that it belonged to the passenger or the crew member. And over the years, I've had people say, well, can you prove this, prove that? I don't have to prove anything really anymore. It's been 23 years now. And I think it's your time to prove to me. Your conspiracy is the much bigger one. It involves many more people, and it should be obvious. And to give you an example, is that if you're saying that these plane crashes never materialized, that means that you are now involving the residents of, say, Somerset County in Pennsylvania, Washington, D.C., and Arlington County in Washington, D.C., the thousands of people in New York City who saw Flight 175 crash in the South Tower. So now you're involving thousands of people involved. And you have to make sure for the last 22 years that nobody who saw a plane crash at any of these sites ever deviated from the narrative that these, government or agents, pressure these people into saying. That means you have to monitor every single phone call. You have to make sure that they're not in a cafe talking to a friend saying, this is what really happened. I mean, it's impossible. It's also ludicrous. Another example would be now you have to explain or show evidence for plane debris and how it was planted in broad daylight in front of thousands of people, under tons of debris, especially at Pentagon. And I found parts of landing gear in the C drive under tons of debris. And I spoke to and interviewed the Pentagon Incident Commander, Fire Chief James Schwartz, was one of the first chiefs to arrive on the site, and he basically operated the command center there. And most of the plane was under tons of debris. The plane debris was planted in front of everybody at Somerset County, in the trees and in the forests. The melted plastic, they're coming down from the trees. The human remains were just dropped everywhere. Same at the Pentagon, in front of all those people running in and out of the building. They're just going to dump an engine on Murray Street, which is where they found the engine for Flight 175 at, for everybody, and nobody saw nothing. And also all the technical data, the analytical data from radar. All those people at the FAA working at Cleveland Center, Washington Center, New York Center, Boston Center, all those people, public people, they're going to manipulate data showing a plane taking off Logan, crashing into the World Trade Center, plane taken out of Newark, crashing into Shanksville. All that data is manipulated. Prove it. And then you have a case. And then I'm with you because I'm all about data. I'm all about information. And I think people who know me quite well so far on here can assert I'm being bold here, because I don't think of it this way, that I'm a consistent source of information without bias and without prejudice. So that's my request for you, the people who don't believe that a plane crashed anywhere, or that, it was actually a plane, but it wasn't the hijacked flights. You have an enormous task where if those things really did happen, that, these weren't the planes that were hijacked that crashed here, and that the debris was switched, that all these people were in on it, you have a lot of information. You have a lot of evidence to show for this, because your conspiracy is a much bigger one. The easy explanation for all of this is that you have to kill everybody on the plane anyway. So this way they don't tell the truth, right? Why don't you just allow the planes to be hijacked and allow for air defense to stand down or to engage in exercises away from where the hijacked flights are, and allow them to crash there Now you involve less people. You also don't have to, start planting plane debris in front of eyewitnesses in broad daylight. You don't have to manipulate data in front of private people at their jobs and make sure that they go along with everything. You involve far less people. And then you could compartmentalize from that point on. And then what you do is you spread misinformation through the CIA, because that's what they do. And look, it's worked, because the planes were hijacked. They crashed where they crashed. And still, you have people that don't believe it because we're awash in disinformation. Thanks to Alex Jones, thanks to Jim Fetzer, thanks to Jason Burmis, Dave Von Kleist, the Citizens Investigation Team, Rebecca Roth, Christopher Bolin. I can name dozens of others. They did the job. Barbara Honegger. All these people don't believe in hijackers or hijacked flights. Or if they do, they believe that it was a swap and that the planes were drones and stuff like that. But they stop right there because they can't prove anything else. They have no evidence for their position. Now, outside of those people, the people who follow them are victims. I'm not blaming you. I'm not yelling at you or criticizing you. I came from that mindset because I watched Loose Change. I watched the documentary In Plain Sight by Dave Von Kleist, and real plane, that doesn't look like a plane crash, because when you look at the Pentagon in Shanksville, it doesn't, right? Because we're used to regular plane crashes where the plane has a malfunction or is low on fuel. The pilot tries to land the plane safely. The first thing they do is dump the fuel. So this way, plane doesn't explode when they land hard. And then they try to land on their belly at slow speeds. And, look at every other plane crash in history. But you can't compare that to intentional plane crashes where the pilot doesn't care about living or keeping everybody else safe. He's trying to kill everybody on the plane. The plane itself is a bomb because it's carrying, and especially if it's a Boeing 757, 767, 200 bus series, they carry 37,000 pounds of fuel. That's 12 to 13,000 gallons. Think of what a body would look like when it hits the Pentagon wall or the Shanksville ground at 500 miles an hour, going through a tremendous fireball, almost breaking the speed of sound. You're not going to find much of anything at all. And that's the difference, is intentional plane crashes and non-intentional plane crashes. And by doing this, by making these scenarios up, that the planes were holograms or drones, the real conspiracy involving intelligence and Al-Qaeda is lost. Because if you don't believe hijackers were involved in the crashing of that plane, or if you believe that they hijacked the plane, but then it was switched for a drone, well, guess what happens? Even if you're somebody who says that there's a switch, your story ends there because there's no evidence on your part that shows that where the plane took off or where it landed, because you have no evidence for this. It's just speculation. And it's been speculation for 23 years. Meanwhile, I have all the evidence on my side. I have the phone calls. I have the airline employees who gave them their boarding passes. I have them going to flight schools. I have their physical evidence left on the planes that were found at the crash sites. You don't have anything. You're working on the premise that my evidence is no good and that your speculation is the evidence. And in a court of law, you would be thrown out of court, and actually your case would be a frivolous case. There's no evidence to show for this. And if you're going to say, well, the evidence is suppressed by the government, well, that's your way out, right? Because now you're saying that the government can control everything. Meanwhile, they find, 60 something boxes in Donald Trump's bathroom at Mar-a-Lago. Do you really think that the president and his White House aides are basically going to facilitate the cover up of the magnitude of switching hijacked airline plane debris with drone plane debris and fake DNA? Well, good luck and God bless, right? You are never going to find evidence for those scenarios, ever. And if you want conspiracy, and there's a lot of it, and if you want to delve into specifics, my channel, as well as DJ Thermal Detonators and Sean Russell and Darren Harvey and the podcast for New American Century, we're still out here. We're still working. And we are showing you the real conspiracies involving a White House cover-up and the CIA, the NSA, and foreign intelligence involving Israel and Saudi Arabia, involvement with Al-Qaeda and the hijacking team of 9/11. Ryan Dawson is still active. So we still got some people here bringing this to attention. Not many, but we're still out here. Guess who isn't here anymore? Christopher Boland, Rebecca Roth, Barbara Honegger, Citizens Investigation Team, all the no-planers, all the switch planers. They don't talk about 9/11 anymore. Not even Jason Burmis, really. Only maybe when there's, a really big story and he still gets that wrong, or the anniversary. Unlike us, who are posting things every day because we're learning something new. They can't learn anything new. Why? Because to learn something new would mean to contradict the speculation that you possess. If there's no hijackers, that means all the information related to hijackers is irrelevant. And all the information involving the intelligence agencies who are involved with the hijackers, that information is relevant. You don't believe in hijackers, so you're not going to get the information. Why am I looking at that? I don't believe in hijackers. So there you have it. You hit a stone wall. So that's my message. Hopefully I can reach a couple of people out there who are, really at odds. I was there. I can understand. And if you have any questions, I'm always accessible, unlike those people that I mentioned. I'm accessible. I'm still active. And I will always be at your service. Okay, guys, see you in the next video.